a critical examination of Drive, whose portrayal of evil and malice, the portrayal of evil and malice in Doctor, whose narrative is indeed a fascinating thread that has been woven throughout the series' rich history. One of the key ways in which Doctor Who's writers have explored the concept of evil is through the creation of complex and multifaceted antagonists. For example, take the character of the Master, the renegade Time Lord, former friend of the Doctor, who is driven by a desire for power and control. The Master is a masterclass, no pun intended, in crafting a villain who is both ruthless and charismatic, with a depth and nuance that makes him a compelling adversary. However, despite the complexity of some of Doctor Who's villains, the show often finds itself walking the fine line that you mentioned. On the one hand, the Doctor and his companions are frequently struggling against monstrous forces that require great bravery and sacrifice to defeat. Take, for example, the Daleks, cyborg alien creatures bent on exterminating all life in the universe. The Daleks' creator, Dalek himself, is not just a symbol of evil, but a physical manifestation of it, with their almost fanatical adherence to their own ideology. In these moments, the show's portrayal of evil is unambiguous. It's a force to be feared and opposed. On the other hand, the show's portrayal of evil often rubs up against the idea of fascination and even, occasionally, justification. Think back to the infamous episode Genesis of the Daleks, in which the Doctor, along with his companions, inadvertently creates the Daleks themselves. This episode explores the theme of the nature of evil and whether it's a choice or a product of circumstance. The Doctor's conflicting emotions, horror and fascination, raise questions about whether the Daleks are simply a manifestation of their creator's singular intent or if there is something more inherent to their being. This gray area creates a more nuanced exploration of the concept of evil and highlights the complexity of this character. As the show unfolds, it's not uncommon for the lines between good and evil to become increasingly blurred. Characters like the Weeping Angels, who, though monstrous in their nature, are more akin to cryptids than monstrous entities, demonstrate this thematic exploration. Their motivations, if you'll forgive the pun, steal our fear and attention in a far more cerebral way than the Daleks. Rather than dealing with simplistic, outright evil, Doctor Who's narrative chooses instead to invest the complexity behind the monsters by humanizing and making relatable even the most malevolent of its characters. Of course, some might argue that Doctor Who's tendency to humanize its villains comes from a desire to echo the complexity of real-world morality. Many times, we see the bad guys motivated by perfectly understandable sympathetic reasons. For instance, in the case of the character of the Rassilon, Doctor Who's creator of the Time Lords Society gets to justify its ideology despite its fundamentally flawed and at times ruthless practices. In doing so, the show questions which true interests it should really be protecting, time or perhaps simply humanity. This nuance means that Doctor Who's episode after episode serves as a platform for debating and confronting our understanding of how societies label or justify certain behaviors. Its portrayal of the darker aspects of the universe lets the public engage, often uncomfortably, with fundamental questions of morality, and, thus, we become immersed in a rich understanding of what is seen as evil.